In a world where power, loyalty, and manipulation are the currency of survival, Bola faces his greatest challenge yet, taking down the ruthless businessman, Chief Desmond. As Bola uncovers a trail of corruption, crime, and lies, he realizes that Desmond's empire is far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Armed with secrets, a team of unlikely allies, and a plan to expose the truth, Bola prepares for a high-stakes confrontation. But when he steps into Desmond's trap, the game takes a deadly turn. Will Bola outsmart a criminal mastermind, or has he walked into a nightmare from which there's no escape? Find out in this heart-pounding tale of betrayal, power, and survival. The two men met in a secret location, the air thick with tension. As Desmond spoke, Bola kept his guard up, never fully trusting his rival's words. Beneath the surface of their conversation, Bola was already formulating his next move. Time was running out, and he couldn't afford to make a mistake. With each passing second, the danger grew, but Bola was determined to outsmart Desmond, no matter the cost. The stakes were higher than ever, and Bola's every decision could be the difference between victory and ruin. As the truce continued, Bola worked diligently behind the scenes, gathering more information about Chief Desmond's operations. He thought he was getting closer to the truth, but in the shadows, betrayal was already taking root. One evening, as Bola sifted through the documents he had collected, a sudden message flashed on his phone. It was from Damilola, the journalist who had been helping him. "We've got trouble," the message read. "Someone in your inner circle is working with Desmond." Panic surged through Bola as he read the words. He had trusted everyone in his network, but now he realized that there was a more. The thought sent a chill down his spine. The discovery hit Bola like a blow. It became clear that Desmond had anticipated his every move and had planted someone to sabotage his efforts. The very people Bola had relied on for support might now be the ones responsible for his downfall. Bola knew he couldn't afford to wait any longer. The time had come to confront the mole, expose the truth, and take control of the situation before Desmond could use the betrayal against him. It was a race against time, and the stakes were higher than ever. Bola knew the mole had to be someone close, but identifying the traitor was a challenge. After hours of considering the possibilities, he began to suspect Femi, the former business partner. Femi's complicated history with Desmond, combined with his manipulative tendencies, made him a likely candidate. However, the suspicion weighed heavily on Bola. Femi had been a loyal ally in many ways, and the thought of him being the betrayer was difficult to accept. But Bola knew he couldn't afford to be wrong. He had to confront Femi directly to find out the truth. Bola arranged a private meeting with Femi, hoping to read his reactions and uncover any hidden motives. As they sat across from each other, Bola carefully asked pointed questions, watching Femi's every movement for signs of guilt. At first, Femi seemed nervous, but as the conversation went on, his demeanor changed. Bola could sense that something was off, but the question remained, was Femi the mole, or was there someone else involved? The tension between them thickened, and Bola realized that the answer was still elusive. Femi vehemently denied the accusations when Bola confronted him about being the mole. He seemed genuinely offended by the suggestion, insisting that he had nothing to do with Desmond or his schemes. Bola listened carefully, weighing every word, trying to assess whether Femi was lying or telling the truth. The more Femi spoke, the more Bola began to question his own assumptions. Femi had been a loyal ally in the past, and his defense seemed sincere. It made Bola wonder if he had been too quick to suspect him. The conversation was tense, but Bola couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't adding up. As the meeting ended, Femi promised to continue supporting Bola and doing everything in his power to help take down Desmond. Despite Femi's reassurances, Bola remained uncertain. He couldn't afford to ignore the possibility of betrayal, but for the moment, he had no other leads. He decided to hold off on his suspicions and give Femi the benefit of the doubt, but Bola knew that trust had become a fragile thing. The battle against Desmond was far from over, and Bola couldn't afford to be naive. With Femi cleared of suspicion, at least for now, Bola and his allies pressed forward with their plan to expose Chief Desmond. They knew that any misstep could send Desmond into hiding, so they proceeded with caution. Their first priority was gathering irrefutable evidence of Desmond's criminal empire. Damilola, the investigative journalist, had been working tirelessly for months, uncovering a network of shell companies, money laundering schemes, and illegal deals that Desmond had been orchestrating behind the scenes. Now, with the pieces in place, it was time to bring everything to light. Bola and his team carefully mapped out each move, ensuring that they would hit Desmond with an overwhelming force of evidence. The plan was to take the evidence public through the media. It was the one tool they had that could expose Desmond's criminal activities on a global scale. But even as the strategy took shape, Bola felt the weight of the danger they were caught in. Desmond was a dangerous man, and the moment he caught wind of their intentions, he would stop at nothing to silence them. Bola steeled himself for the coming confrontation, knowing that the battle ahead would be fierce. Time was running out, and every moment was critical. The day had arrived. Bola and his allies were ready to launch their final strike against Chief Desmond. Every detail had been carefully planned. Damilola had coordinated with a trusted news outlet to air the exposé, and Femi had secured the crucial documents that would prove Desmond's criminal activities. As the broadcast began, Bola watched from a secure location, his heart racing. For the first time in a long time, he felt a surge of hope. The world was finally seeing the truth about Desmond's illegal empire. The carefully gathered evidence was laid bare for all to see, and Bola knew that this moment marked a significant victory. But even as he allowed himself a moment of triumph, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. As the expose aired, Desmond's face appeared on the screen. His usual self-assured demeanor had been replaced by a cold fury. The man who had once held so much power now looked exposed and vulnerable, but that vulnerability was fleeting. Bola knew Desmond wouldn't go down without a fight. The broadcast was just the beginning of a much larger war. Bola had won this round, but Desmond's revenge would be swift, and it would be deadly. The real challenge lay ahead, and Bola would need every ounce of strength and cunning to survive the storm that was about to descend on him. The exposure of Chief Desmond's criminal activities sent shockwaves throughout the city. For a brief moment, it seemed like Bola had won. Desmond was arrested, and his vast empire began to crumble under the weight of the evidence. But the victory was short-lived. Desmond's numerous powerful allies quickly mobilized, launching a counteroffensive to discredit the evidence. They attacked the credibility of the journalist, the witnesses, and even Bola himself. The media became a battleground, with Desmond's supporters spreading lies and misinformation. Bola and his allies found themselves under siege, and what had seemed like a decisive blow to Desmond's reign quickly turned into a drawn-out legal battle. The legal fight that followed was long and arduous. Bola and his team were forced into hiding, constantly on the move, as Desmond's remaining supporters worked relentlessly to silence them. The stakes were higher than ever before. Bola understood now that taking down Desmond had only been the first step in a much larger fight. The consequences of failure were more dire than he could have imagined. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Bola knew there was no turning back. The fight for justice had only just begun, and he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. As the legal battle raged on, Bola found himself facing mounting pressure. His allies were being targeted one by one, and the media campaign to discredit him was gaining momentum. Every step forward seemed to be met with 2 steps back, and Bola feared that his efforts might ultimately fail. Just when things seemed darkest, Mr. Tony, the goldsmith who had been helping Bola from the beginning, stepped forward with an unexpected offer. "You're not alone in this," Tony said, reassuring him. With a network of loyal business partners, many of whom owed him favors, Tony's connections could be the turning point they desperately needed. Bola realized that Tony's support could make all the difference. With Tony's backing, Bola was able to gather more crucial evidence, reaching out to key players who had previously been too afraid to speak out against Desmond. The new alliance brought a fresh surge of hope. Together, they began to build a more solid case, one that could withstand the onslaught of Desmond's powerful allies. But even with this newfound support, Bola knew the battle was far from over. Desmond's forces were still relentless, and the stakes were higher than ever. The fight for justice was reaching its peak, and Bola understood that one misstep could cost him everything. With the additional support from Tony's network, Bola strengthened his case against Chief Desmond. However, the legal battle became fiercer than ever. Desmond was using every resource at his disposal to delay proceedings and discredit the evidence. The media attacks were relentless, painting Bola as a villain, and soon, his name was being dragged through the mud. Forced into hiding for his safety, Bola could only watch as Desmond's influence grew stronger. The constant pressure weighed heavily on him, and it seemed like the fight was becoming increasingly impossible. But despite the mounting threats, Bola's resolve never wavered. He had come too far to back down now. Meanwhile, Desmond continued to manipulate the law with his powerful lawyers, who fought tooth and nail to protect his empire. Every court session felt like a war, each day a battle for survival. But Bola and Tony were working tirelessly behind the scenes, using their network to expose Desmond's corruption. Though the battle seemed insurmountable, Bola knew that the truth was on his side. He couldn't afford to stop now, not when they were so close to bringing Desmond down for good. The fight for justice was reaching its breaking point, and Bola was prepared to go all the way. After months of legal warfare, Bola reached a tipping point. Desmond's empire was beginning to crack under the mounting pressure. Key witnesses, once too afraid to testify, had found the courage to come forward, encouraged by the growing public support for Bola's cause. As more secrets about Desmond's illegal activities were uncovered, it seemed that the walls were finally closing in on him. But Desmond wasn't about to surrender so easily. Realizing that he might lose everything, he resorted to desperate measures, starting with targeting Bola's allies. He began threatening their families and businesses, hoping to weaken their resolve. Tony was the first to be targeted, and the pressure on Bola intensified. Yet, despite the mounting danger, Bola refused to back down. With every new piece of evidence, the truth became undeniable. In the courtroom, things were starting to turn in Bola's favor. The tide of the battle was shifting, but Desmond, ever the strategist, was about to make his final, most dangerous move. The game was far from over, and Bola knew that Desmond's desperation could lead to anything. But he had come too far to stop now. The stakes had never been higher, and Bola was ready to face whatever Desmond threw at him. The fight for justice was nearing its climax, and the final confrontation was inevitable. The battle reached its boiling point as Desmond made his final move. He orchestrated a series of attacks against Bola's remaining allies, culminating in a brutal ambush on Tony. The attack left Tony severely injured, sending shockwaves through Bola's network. Filled with rage and desperation, Bola knew that the time for playing by the rules had passed. It was no longer just about exposing Desmond, it was about survival. Bola gathered his allies and devised a plan to take Desmond down once and for all. They would strike at the heart of Desmond's operation, dismantling his criminal network piece by piece. As Desmond tried to move his pieces into position, Bola was already a step ahead. This would be the final confrontation, the moment that would determine the future of both men. Bola was ready to risk everything. The night before the final showdown, Bola and his allies gathered one last time, finalizing their plan to dismantle Desmond's criminal empire. The coordinated strike on Desmond's assets and financial resources was said to be their most decisive move yet. But as they made their final preparations, Bola received an urgent call. Desmond had discovered their plan. It was a trap. Bola's heart raced as he realized they were surrounded, with no way out. Desmond had anticipated their every move, and the ambush was swift and brutal. His allies were cornered, and they had no choice but to fight back. The air was thick with tension as the sounds of gunfire erupted across the city, signaling the start of an all-out battle. As chaos unfolded around him, Bola fought with everything he had, determined to protect his team and stop Desmond once and for all. The battle was relentless, the odds overwhelming, but Bola pushed forward, undeterred. Amidst the confusion, he caught sight of Desmond in the distance, the man who had caused him so much pain. This was the moment. It was now or never. With the final confrontation within reach, Bola knew he had to take down Desmond, no matter the cost. The fight for justice had reached its peak, and Bola was ready to risk everything for the chance to end Desmond's reign of terror. In the midst of the chaos, Bola finally came face to face with Chief Desmond. Their eyes locked in a moment of mutual recognition, and Desmond, ever the arrogant manipulator, smirked, convinced he still had the upper hand. But Bola was done with the games. With one swift, decisive move, he knocked Desmond to the ground. The tide of the battle shifted instantly. Desmond's henchmen, seeing their leader fall, began to surrender one by one. Bola didn't give Desmond the chance to recover, swiftly binding his hands. "This ends now," Bola declared, his voice resolute. The corrupt businessman, the mastermind behind years of manipulation, was finally in his custody. For the first time in a long while, Bola felt a sense of victory. Yet, as Desmond was dragged away, the weight of the moment settled on Bola's shoulders. The fight for justice had come to a dramatic conclusion, but Bola knew the battle was far from over. Desmond's empire had been brought down, but the corruption that plagued the city ran deep. Bola had won this battle, but the war was just beginning. With Desmond out of the picture, Bola now faced the challenge of dismantling the system that had allowed such power to thrive for so long. The future of the city, and of Bola's own life, hung in the balance. Bola stood in the courtroom as the trial against Chief Desmond began, the air thick with anticipation. The charges were staggering: corruption, money laundering, extortion, and even murder, and for the first time in a long while, Bola felt a sense of triumph. Desmond, the man who had once been untouchable, was now facing the consequences of his actions. The evidence was overwhelming, and the public eagerly watched, hoping to see justice served. The courtroom was packed with reporters, witnesses, and supporters of Bola, all eager to witness the downfall of a powerful criminal empire. As the trial unfolded, Bola could see Desmond's arrogance slowly crack, and for the first time, the true scope of his crimes was laid bare. Watching Desmond, once a towering figure of power, reduced to a mere criminal, was a deeply emotional moment for Bola. He had fought for so long, endured so much, and now, at last, justice was within his grasp. The man who had caused him so much pain and suffering was finally being held accountable. Though the victory was sweet, Bola didn't allow himself to revel in it for long. The weight of everything he had gone through hung heavy on him. The fight had been long, and the cost had been high, but it was over now. The city would never be the same, and Bola could finally start to rebuild what had been broken. After a tense few weeks, the trial finally reached its conclusion. The jury deliberated for hours, but when the verdict was read, it was unmistakable: Chief Desmond was guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted into applause, and for the first time in a long while, Bola allowed himself to feel a rush of relief. He had fought tirelessly for this moment, and it was finally here. Desmond was sentenced to life in prison, his empire shattered, and his criminal reign brought to an end. For Bola, it was the culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice, a hard-earned victory that marked the beginning of a new chapter. However, as he surveyed the courtroom, a sense of bittersweetness settled over him. While Desmond's downfall was a triumph, the damage inflicted on the city was not so easily undone. The corruption that had festered under Desmond's rule had left deep scars, and Bola knew that the path to true justice and recovery would be a long one. The city was wounded, its trust shattered, and healing would take time. But as the echoes of victory rang in his ears, Bola understood that this was just the beginning. The fight for a better, fairer future had only started, and it would be up to people like him to see it through. With Desmond behind bars, Bola focused on the long, difficult task of rebuilding the city. It was no longer just about bringing down one corrupt individual, it was about restoring integrity to the system that had allowed Desmond to rise to power in the first place. Bola worked closely with local leaders, community organizations, and the media to begin the cleanup. The remnants of corruption were still deeply entrenched, and Desmond's influence still lingered in the shadows. But the people of the city were ready for change, and Bola was determined to make it happen. Every small victory, every step forward, was a sign that things were moving in the right direction. As he walked through the streets, witnessing the gradual return of hope in the eyes of the people, Bola knew that justice had prevailed. The road to recovery would be long and full of challenges, but it was a path worth walking. The city was healing, slowly but surely, and Bola remained resolute in his commitment to see it through. The journey had been grueling and painful, filled with personal sacrifice and loss, but the fight for a better future was far from over. With each passing day, Bola grew more confident that the city could rise from the ashes, and he would be there, leading the charge. Months after the trial, Bola stood at the podium before a large crowd, addressing the future of the city. He had become a symbol of resilience, a man who had fought against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. His efforts had not only brought down Chief Desmond but had also ignited a larger movement for reform. As he spoke to the crowd, Bola emphasized the importance of unity, transparency, and accountability, urging everyone to work together for a better tomorrow. He made it clear that the fight didn't end with Desmond's imprisonment. The city needed to be rebuilt, and the work had only just begun. Bola had transformed from a man seeking revenge to a leader advocating for lasting change. The people had come to trust him, seeing him as a beacon of hope in a city that had long been plagued by corruption. As he looked out over the crowd, Bola knew the road ahead was still uncertain, and the challenges would be many. But he was ready to lead the charge, carrying the hopes and dreams of the people with him. Together, they would create a new future, one built on the foundation of justice and integrity. With the momentum from his speech, Bola quickly moved to implement sweeping reforms across the city's legal, financial, and political systems. He worked closely with law enforcement to root out corruption at all levels, ensuring that those who had supported Desmond's empire were held accountable. The public, energized by the prospect of change, rallied behind him. Bola wasted no time, and as the reforms began to take shape, it was clear that the city's transformation had already begun. However, resistance from the old power structures was inevitable, and there were moments when the fight seemed overwhelming. Yet Bola remained resolute, knowing that each challenge was a step toward a better future. Despite the resistance, Bola's connections, built over months of tireless work, proved invaluable as he navigated the political landscape. With each success, more citizens began to believe that real change was possible. The road ahead would be long and fraught with difficulties, but Bola knew the hardest part was behind him. The city had suffered for too long under corruption, and now, under his leadership, it was ready to heal. As the reforms took hold, Bola could sense that a new chapter for the city was unfolding, one defined by hope, integrity, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Just as the city began to stabilize, Bola received unsettling news. A new criminal syndicate was emerging in the shadows, taking advantage of the power vacuum left by Desmond's fall. The syndicate was ruthless, highly organized, and spreading rapidly. Bola had hoped that with Desmond's arrest, the city would finally be free of such threats, but it became clear that the fight for control of the city was far from over. The new syndicate was unlike anything Bola had faced before, and its influence was growing with alarming speed. Bola knew that if they didn't act quickly, the city could fall into chaos once again. Determined to prevent this, Bola convened his closest allies, including Damilola and Tony, to discuss the new syndicate. Together, they began to formulate a plan to strike before the criminals could gain a stronger foothold. Bola was resolute; they needed to move swiftly and decisively. But even as he prepared for this new battle, Bola understood that this fight would be even more challenging than the last. The stakes were higher, and the dangers greater, but he had no choice. He couldn't allow the city to slip back into the grip of corruption and violence, not after everything they had fought for. Bola set out to uncover the network behind the new syndicate, determined to stop it before it could gain too much power. With the help of his allies, including Damilola, they leveraged their journalistic and investigative skills to gather intelligence. They followed leads, pieced together information from various sources, and slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It became clear that the syndicate was a group of former associates of Desmond, many of whom had gone underground after his arrest. Now, they were attempting to rebuild his empire, but in a more secretive and decentralized way. Bola realized that taking down this new syndicate wouldn't be as simple as targeting its leader. It would require a more nuanced approach. Instead of going after the head of the operation directly, Bola knew they would need to dismantle the syndicate from within, exposing each part of the network and cutting off its resources one by one. With each new lead, Bola's mind raced with strategies, but the pressure was mounting. Time was running out. If the syndicate continued to grow unchecked, it would soon become too powerful to defeat. Bola couldn't afford to hesitate. The city's future depended on his ability to stop this new threat before it could take root. In his pursuit of the new criminal syndicate, Bola came face to face with a dangerous figure from Desmond's past, Kola, a former enforcer known for his brutal tactics. Kola had disappeared when Desmond was arrested, but it became clear that he was now leading the resurgence of the criminal network. One evening, Bola attempted to infiltrate one of Kola's operations, hoping to gather information. The encounter quickly turned violent. Kola, realizing he had been discovered, tried to escape, but Bola was determined to stop him. The two men clashed through dark alleyways and abandoned buildings, each using their wits and strength to outmaneuver the other. In the end, Bola barely escaped with his life, injured but alive. Despite the close call, the confrontation proved valuable. Kola's attempt to flee had revealed critical intel about the syndicate's operations, giving Bola the edge he needed to plan his next move. However, Kola had underestimated Bola's resolve, and the enforcer's survival instincts remained razor-sharp. Bola knew that the battle was far from over. Kola was still a dangerous adversary, and as long as he was leading the syndicate, the city was not yet safe. This was only the beginning of an even more dangerous chapter in Bola's fight for justice. Bola's close encounter with Kola had rattled him, but it also provided crucial insight into the syndicate's inner workings. Determined to regain the upper hand, he devised a strategy to strike directly at the syndicate's financial heart. He knew that Kola was using a network of shell companies and underground businesses to launder money and fund criminal activities. With Damilola and Tony working tirelessly to gather documents and track these operations, Bola understood the need for caution to avoid tipping off the syndicate. After weeks of careful planning, they managed to secure enough evidence to expose the money trail. Bola took the gathered information to the authorities, ensuring that the syndicate's financial empire would be targeted in a series of raids. As the operations began, Bola watched as key players in the syndicate's network were arrested and their assets frozen. There was a sense of satisfaction in knowing they were making progress. But even as the syndicate's financial power crumbled, Bola knew the danger was far from over. Kola and the rest of the syndicate were still at large, and Bola had to stay vigilant. This fight was far from finished. With the syndicate's finances crippled, Bola knew it was time for the final assault. He had been tracking Kola and his key lieutenants, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His team had gathered intel on the location of the syndicate's main hideout, a heavily fortified compound on the outskirts of the city. The plan was clear: hit hard and fast, neutralizing the threat before Kola could retaliate. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, the authorities launched a full-scale operation, while Bola and his allies infiltrated the compound. The battle that followed was intense. Gunfire echoed through the night as Bola fought alongside law enforcement to take down the criminals who had terrorized the city for so long. In the end, they captured Kola and the remaining syndicate members, dismantling the entire operation. With this victory, Bola had finally broken the criminal stranglehold on the city. The streets that had once been ruled by fear and corruption began to breathe again, and Bola felt the weight of the moment. Though the battle was over, the journey had been long and arduous. The city would need time to heal, but for now, justice had been served. Bola had not only avenged the past but had ensured a safer future for his city. With the syndicate dismantled and Kola behind bars, the city began to breathe easier. The streets, once filled with fear, were now filled with hope. Bola had achieved what seemed impossible. He had brought down two powerful criminal empires and started the long process of rebuilding a broken city. But even as he looked toward the future, Bola knew there was still much work ahead. True change would take time, and there would always be those who sought to undo the progress they had made. The fight for justice was never truly over. Yet, as Bola stood on the balcony overlooking the city, he felt a sense of peace. The fight had not been easy, but it had been worth it. He had seen the city through its darkest days, and now, he could begin to envision a brighter future. Bola had come a long way, and while the journey had been grueling, he understood that the road to lasting change had only just begun. But for the first time in a long while, he believed it was a road worth traveling.